Hello, and welcome to Behind the Headlines, our behind the headlines analysis of current events. For this presentation, Father Cekada and I, this is Bishop Dolan, would like to speak to you a little bit about, some of the milestones, a bit of a roundup of this past year, 2019. First of all, we turn to our Lord in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Almighty and everlasting God, in whose power are times and seasons, bless this new year and crown it with thy goodness. O Lord, keep in peace thy holy Catholic Church, the state, and at the intercession of the Mother of God, save us all. O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So, Father, this program, I have an interesting recap of some of the great milestones of 2019, which our esteemed founder and president, Stephen Heiner, sent over to us. And I thought it made a very, very good summary. We're going to look a little bit then at the news in the light of three main ideas. And the first of these is the abuse that we have dealt to our children, we meaning the world itself, of late. Secondly, because this is about behind the headlines, the secondary theme is naturally lies and more lies. And then finally, that cheery note, which is always popping up in our news, pushback, how we just ain't going to take it anymore. So, what we've done to our children, under that, we would list, infanticide laws being strengthened. Remember those gruesome laws the different state legislatures passed gleefully, as though they were bestowing a great boon upon all of humanity, and how it became a shibboleth or a sign of proper wokenness, as the liberals say about themselves, that they're woked people, to be in favor of the dissection of live children. That happened this year. Then, speaking about children, there's that interesting case of the attack on the Covington kids who, a year ago, last January, were just having a class trip to Washington, D.C., and ran into some crazy demonstrators, some Indian people or wannabe Indians. I don't think Elizabeth Warren was with them, however, Father.
No, I don't believe so.
I don't believe so, no. She probably...
But this would add the note of authenticity.
It would have, but I think she may have had a casino to manage in the meantime.
Possibly.
Well, they didn't, these being only high school boys, I think they were high school boys, yes, they were from Covington Catholic. That's not too far from where we are in Westchester, Ohio. And they were outside the Supreme Court building, which I guess is somewhat of a locus place for all sorts of demonstrations. And someone made a big to-do about that and about the reaction of these boys. And what I'll always remember, and how much this tells us about the world and the Novus Ordo Church, is how one of the very first ones, and everybody vied to be first to attack these high school kids, was their own bishop, the Bishop of Covington. They were attending his Latin school.
Yeah, he was the first to cave in.
The first to cave in, yes. Because what's the job of a bishop if not to cave in to pressure?
Right, yes.
They were Novus Ordo kids, but just kids.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really know about anything, and how they were attacked by the whole world. And that shows, I think, one of the perduring ideas that gives us a correct interpretation of what's going on behind the headlines. And that is to say, there is always going to be pressure, and someone is always going to be bowing to the pressure. When things happen, at some point, you just can't resist it anymore. So there was that, well, they called it the Me Too movement, how women wanted the right for themselves to be immoral, to dress immorally and live and socialize in very immoral settings, and yet at the same time did not want to be attacked by men and not even to further their own career. And those who are in the public eye, and how that became quite the movement during the course of the last year too. And it did, I'm convinced, simply because these things are popular for being popular, and that's part of American life, isn't it, Father?
Yeah, there is a famous book that was written at the beginning of the 1960s, I believe, called The Cult of the Image. In fact, it was, perhaps I mentioned it before, it was Robert Burston, who was the
Mm.
Librarian of Congress. And he was he gave very good analysis of different social trends. And he talked about this cult of the image, the importance of public image that one saw more and more in the media in the 50s and then even in the early 60s when he was writing. And how this ended up being actually being a substitute for reality. And commentators since on his work have pointed out how really perceptive Burston was, and how his prophecies, as it were, and observations really were true for the future and certainly for our own times. What we have now is would have been, I think, at that point at least, unimaginable. But you have this instantaneous reaction that you see social media mob mentality that you saw against the Covington Latin students right away. And you saw how people were carried away with that, denouncing them. And also the Me Too movement, that this became almost like a mob action as well. It's true that you say that you can only push people so far sometimes, it seems, before there is a reaction. But in both of these cases, really what a strong reaction it was. And it was because of the ease with which discourse it can be manipulated by the manipulation of images through the social media.
And so the kids today live entirely and die entirely by the social media.
Exactly.
And it's not just kids, it's adults as well. Everyone is totally connected, and everyone is, because of that, keenly conscious of going along to get along. You can't not be faddish, you can't not follow the styles. If that was true, maybe in the 1960s, you could say the pressure in closed societies and the pressure amongst in youth, for two examples, of following the fads and the fashions. Imagine what it is today, because they're self-policing and because they never turn off that electronic voice telling them that they have to conform. Well, I think it's the same thing for another example of attack on innocence, more direct and permanent, devastating attack on youth, on children, the whole promotion of this transsexual fad. The trouble with this is not a fad like maybe issuing a statement or getting your hair colored a certain way. This is a fad that leads to manipulation. It leads to the use of drugs for that same purpose, and finally to physical mutilation. It's a fad that some commentators are just now, end of December, early January, talking about perhaps it's peaked. I don't know about that. But those who are the victims are the ones who've had the surgery, are the ones who've been on the pills, and the boys who try to make themselves into girls and girls into boys. And then that whole ludicrous business about the girls' teams being now victorious against boys because they have boys on playing for the team who are disguising themselves as girls. And then one recently, well, she quit the team because she wasn't allowed to use the girls' locker room. It's beyond parody. It's beyond parody. It is its own punishment. But the truth of the matter is that these children are going to be spiritually and psychologically scarred for life as a result of following this particular fad. And there's no one to speak up for them or defend them. More and more laws, and say nothing of the corporations. Someone was telling me outrageous stories about Starbucks the other day, and promoting and paying for. They wouldn't give regular health coverage, but they pay for everything in the way of these transsexual surgeries because it's trendy. It's the thing to do, don't you know?
Yes, you're considered woke if you do it, and singularly unwoke. I guess the opposite of woke would be comatose or something.
Probably so.
If you didn't go along with it, and again, it's this mob type of pressure,
Mhm.
and that is pushed through social media, through Twitter, etc., through Facebook, through these different social sites. And of course, we all know that this can be manipulated, that these media can be very successfully manipulated.
So, manipulation is what dishonesty in speech it is the telling of lies. That leads us to another theme for analyzing the headlines of the past year, and I'm sure this coming year as well. That is to say, this more directly speaks to the standard news that the common man might come across on the internet or television, for that matter. Uh, the different coups, for example, the political coups, which the American government is always engaging in. There was an attempted coup to remove the Marxist president of Venezuela earlier this year during early 2019, and that was unsuccessful. Then the news towards the end of the year came out about another unsuccessful attempt for permanent establishment of a new friendly government in Iran. And that was all about oil, and that was all about money, and it was all about American power. And for Venezuela, guess what? The same things are at play there. Father, you read an article about that, didn't
Yes,
you?
that was absolutely fascinating because, uh, for years you hear the refrain, oh, conspiracy theory, that, there's a evil person under every rock, etc. This is all nonsense. There are no real conspiracies. But then you go back to one of the signal events of the late 1970s
Mhm.
and early 1980s, which was, of course, the Iran hostage crisis. And that was provoked by the United States action toward the Shah of Iran. Now, you may not remember, those of you who are not quite as old, but the Shah of Iran, the title Shah actually is emperor or king. Uh, this man was originally installed by the United States in the 1950s. There was a revolution against him, and the U.S. Again went in the 1950s to restore him by its usual devious means. The golden prize in Iran was Iranian oil. And the big money boys in the United States, of course, were very interested in maintaining control over Iranian oil and over its supply. Uh, and of course, the prominent in that was the Rockefeller family. Remember, if you know your history further back, that it was the Rockefeller fortune was founded on Standard Oil, and it's the great wealth and influence that Standard Oil achieved. Well, in any event, the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, had the problem with a popular revolt against him, because while we're supposed to be the beacon of democracy and of liberty, et cetera, it seemed that it was fine with the United States through several administrations that the Shah ran a very, very repressive state to keep himself in power. So I guess democracy was not for the Iranian people. In any event, what happened is finally in the 1970s, there was a revolt against the Shah of Iran. He was exiled from the country, and he wanted to get into the United States, figuring that it was, after all, the United States who had made all of these efforts on his behalf. Well, at that point, it seemed the United States was quite willing to abandon him to his fate. That's something real.
It's been known to happen.
It's been known to happen.
I think,
yes,
that's it. Yeah.
And so what happened is the Shah, got a hold of David Rockefeller, who's the head of the Chase Manhattan Bank, one of the big United States financial interests, the really big money boys in the world. And it was Rockefeller who tried and eventually succeeded in using his influence to get the United States to admit the Shah of Iran. Well, this recently came out in documentation from an aide to Rockefeller, a man named Reed, who was essential in putting this particular deal together. And as a result of this, the Shah was admitted to the United States. And this was used as an occasion then by those who had revolted against the Shah to take over the US Embassy and to hold the occupants of the US Embassy as hostages. And this led to a major international crisis. There was a failed rescue attempt, and so on. Uh, but it was the result of, again, influence of the big money boys in United States politics,
including Kissinger, right?
Oh, including Kissinger, and just the whole,
gang.
The whole gang got involved in this, in supporting the Shah of Iran,
one way or another. And then, who do you think was allowed in to take care of the spiritual needs of the hostages for Christmas? For crying out loud, it was our friend Bonini, the Freemason cleric, who finally, when it was too hot for Paul VI to have him in Rome anymore, he sends him off to cool his Masonic apron in the desert winds of Iran. And off he goes, and he arrives with, you don't need much for a Novus Ordo service, that's for sure. So he packs up whatever he required and conducted, and I thought to myself, those poor hostages, as though the Shiite Muslims were not bad enough and all that mistreatment from the so-called students for that long. Imagine having to deal with Bonini on top of everything else, but the guy's a Mason. Not that I'm seeing any possible links with the conspiracy here.
No, definitely not.
No,
not with any lodges in New York or anything like that.
Certainly not. No.
Or Henry Cabot Lodge in Boston or anything like that. No. Well, as they say, you can't make it up.
You can't make it up. No. You step back and you study this stuff. And the other weird thing is that this information then was published and divulged by the New York Times.
Yes.
So then, one of our former colleagues used to say, you have to try to stop and think, and it's a good idea to stop and think from time to time to your audience. What are they really up to? What do they want? What is their goal in doing this? Because be sure they do nothing for nothing, any more than they would sell a barrel of oil for nothing.
Yes, that's right.
There's something going on, and of course that's a little bit the idea of a program like this, to enable us to try to make some sense out of what is really going on behind the headlines. Well, there are more along those same lines, and sometimes from respectable establishment news sources, and sometimes from alternative news sources. More and more proof is emerging that the chemical attack, which was the excuse that Trump and the Americans used to bomb the Syrians at some point in the last year or two, it was supposedly a particularly gruesome chemical attack. Well, that was all set up. That was an inside job, and that was the Americans at work once again for their geopolitical aims. Again, in the Middle East, it's always about the Middle East. Well, not always, because more studies are emerging. This would be totally alternative news about 9/11 being an inside job. And then truth is coming out about Archbishop Tooke's brother, his assassination engineered by the Americans, by Kennedy and Johnson, right?
Yes, and that was extremely striking. There's something, it was something I never heard. There is a recording in the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library where he admits, he says quite specifically, that the U.S. sent in its thugs to kill off the president of Vietnam.
You could look it up, Father. So it's true.
Yes, that's
How
right.
about that? Gee. And of course, all of that was you can't get too far either without admiring and considering the wondrous ways of the divine providence. That was, in effect, the reason for the family of President Diem, including Monsignor Tooke, to come to the West, to leave Vietnam, and that set the stage eventually for the work that he would do in the way of consecrating good men as bishops, such as Bishop Guerra de Loria or Bishop Carmona of Mexico. How interesting how it all works out in the end. We should never forget these kinds of providential connections as we stop and think and consider these things. Well,
while you're talking about lies and media manipulation, Your Excellency, I was just looking for it. I couldn't find it again, but on I believe on Vimeo, there is a video that discusses exactly how Israel has an official policy and a budget for manipulating social media. That
gee, I thought that was only them bad Russians that did that. That's my goodness, Father. Talk about. Are you sure? Well, Israel, America's friend and best ally, the chosen people.
Our little brother in the Middle East.
Little brother in the Middle East. That's our elder brother, I think. Is the
elder
term
brother, I think. So
show some respect.
But it was absolutely fascinating programs. It was about a 15-minute long video, which laid out the different programs that Israel has laid out to promote its aims in social media. And apparently you have people in the IDF, the so-called Israeli Defense Forces. You have whole units that are dedicated to this sort of social media warfare. And certain synagogues in the United States apparently have media rooms where young students who are interested in promoting the Israeli cause do this type of work, volunteer work as well. So it is it's a very big enterprise, and with worldwide scope and worldwide connections to promote again the interests of Israel in the media. They also have a whole division dedicated to Wikipedia. There's a picture of this massive seminar. There must have been 500 people in it somewhere in Israel who dedicated themselves to become editors of Wikipedia. And I don't know if you're familiar with with exactly how that works, but anyone really can become an editor in Wikipedia, and this gives you the right to edit articles kind of as you see fit. Yeah. So this was a giant, well-organized group of people. They were given a seminar how to manipulate Wikipedia because of its wide influence in order to push the Israeli line and their particular line in Israel and history against the Palestinians, etc. So it was quite something very interesting and well-documented film. And maybe as a follow-up to this webcast, we'll have Stephen track down the exact location where you can find it on the internet.
How interesting. Dear audience, we are not only giving you what's behind the headlines, but Father Cekada is just giving you a headline you will never read as a headline. That's for sure. Fascinating, fascinating stuff indeed, as to what is really going on in our country and from our allies. I still can't get over that, Father.
Oh, it's shocking.
It's shocking. I wonder if the president knows about that.
No, he probably didn't.
I don't, because if he knew, he would be doing something. I
He
think
definitely
he would be
would.
doing something
Yeah,
to stop all
it
of
would be
this.
code orange, I think. Yeah.
We'll get to that though. Stay tuned. Under the theme of lies as well, one could and should certainly at least glance in the direction of the whole disgusting Biden, Ukraine, and impeachment folly, which has been dominating the headlines for so long now. The simple truth of the matter is that politicians always make lots of money from being politicians, and that Biden and Biden's son, his son is not a politician, but he's the son of Biden, have gotten millions and millions of dollars from the corrupt government of Ukraine. Maybe that's money that's been fed to Ukrainian by the American government, and it goes back to American politicians. And so the President Trump did want to do something about that. His attention was drawn to that, shall we say, discusses the matter in a very light fashion with the president of Ukraine, and all of a sudden he finds himself being impeached, whereas the criminals suffer nothing at all. It is incredible. Nepotism, the son of Biden, nothing at all. Millions of dollars sitting on these different boards for doing nothing. It is, well, it's outrageous, Father.
Yeah.
It is absolutely outrageous, but there you have it. The theme that Stephen gives us, well, last of all, is that of pushback that we see in the course of the last year. Oh, we talked earlier in this series about the yellow vest movement in France, and that's sort of, well, it's very French because it's revolutionary and it's bloody. And there's and as is often the case, the reaction is sometimes worse than the action, or in any case, the reaction is very, very off-putting. With the yellow vests, I find that to be so, but it does represent a certain disgust on the part of the common average people for being taken advantage of by their government. But yet at the same time, I think that we talked about this before, to understand it completely, you have to know a little bit about how French society and government is structured. These things do not always admit, curiously enough, of a facile explanation.
No.
You might have to actually do a little study and some thinking about it and some research and try to get into, in this case, the French mind. Good luck with that, to understand how they view things.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me in actually dealing with Europe and traveling in Europe was this whole great veneration the French had for strikes.
For strikes,
You hear
yes.
a greve of this and there's a greve of that, and you don't think as a tourist necessarily. That's not a word that is in the general tourist guide, the word greve, but it's a strike. And they have these things all the time, and they regularly mess things up in France. I remember they messed up my travels in France, through France at one point. But it's something that seems to be in the blood. But, yeah,
and here the government is so central in the lives of the Frenchmen. It's everyone always looks to Versailles, I mean Paris, to solve all of their problems. It's a socialist government, highly regulated. They're moving. They want to, these revolting strikers want to have maybe a 4-day work week, things like that. Really outrageous benefits, such as they have a little bit in Argentina.
Mhm.
under the warmed up Peronism, which governs that unhappy land. But yeah, the travelers, and there are a huge amount of people in France that were terribly inconvenienced because of the strike at Christmas time, Christmas travel. What an odd mentality that is. That would sort of accept that as a given, and yet it's part of French life.
Yes, it is, and it repeats over and over and
over and over and over again. Yes. So if you go to France, you're on your own. The Hong Kong protests, that's an interesting example of people in effect kidding themselves, as though what did they expect when Britain handed them over to the tender mercies of the descendants of Mao Zedong? Of course, they're communists, and they're going to act in a communist way, and they're going to crush all independent action and thought. The people are valiantly attempting to protest against that, but you don't see anybody really coming to their aid. Not at all.
No, it's an impossible situation, and those who um, thought that this turning over Hong Kong to China was going to work out in the long run, that it was, I forget exactly what the selling point was. It was two systems, one nation. That was
Yes.
something that I
Yes.
think the chairman would have put in his little red book. But
Was that the chairman of the Conservative Party in England?
Something else, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The so in I mean, how could it? Because it's a communist unitary state. It's governed by the party, and governed by what was called in Russia nomenklatura. These privileged people who are at the top of it and who maintained all of the organs of power of the state. And if they get any real pushback, then they would step in and crush it. The reason that the Chicoms haven't gone in really hard on the people in Hong Kong is because of the West. If you were in an internal part of the country, like the Muslim Uyghurs, something like that, in the West, I mean, these people are all put off in highly controlled situations, re-education camps, the families are separated, etc. That's because they lack certain visibility in the West. Whereas Hong Kong, there are advantages, obviously, to the Chicoms for keeping it going and trying to keep it a little bit under control. But ultimately, the goose of the people there is cooked because the people with the guns hold all the power.
Yes. I've been doing some interesting reading of different analyses of the American movement against communist China, one way and another, because obviously that's an empire, and then you've got another empire in America, and there have been conflicts, and there will be conflicts. It's interesting. Just today, this Secretary of State Pompeo issued a protest for the arrest and imprisonment of a Protestant pastor for 19 years, something like that, for basically just not being a communist. But he's not going to. I thought to myself, he's not going to say anything about a Catholic priest or a Catholic bishop because they've already been betrayed by Bergoglio.
Sure.
So they'll just kind of hands off that one. So there is something. However, if the time comes when the insiders decide, do not be surprised if all of a sudden the Americans will adopt the Hong Kong protesters, and it could happen overnight. And there could just be a little incident or two to kind of juice the process.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yes.
And equally, in our the faithful and consistent way our nation has been operating, they could take them up overnight and then drop them.
Yes.
Drop them several weeks later.
And there'd be wise and good reasons given by our masters in the headlines to justify that. And eventually you would be able to read about it in Wikipedia.
That's right.
As to why what about, to let you know, this is what really did happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Kids maybe 20 years from now, Googling it to find out. And that's the story. Well, certainly pushback is a continuing theme of politics, both in the United Kingdom and in the United States, Father. The tremendous popularity of Trump which continues absolutely unabated, despite all of these Democrat attempts to impeach him, is marvelous to behold. And that tells us that the heartland of America is still with President Trump, and the crazy, loony left-wing antics of orthodox Democrats today has no interest for the average American. They don't even follow it, and they're disgusted by it.
And that, of course, is the other side of the social media, because
Yes.
information can get out, and the people who have similar interests can end up cooperating and can end up working together. And that is perhaps something that you would not have had way back when, let us say before this phenomenon existed, where everything was tightly controlled by the three broadcast channels, by the couple of national newspapers and news services, etc. And when there is no such thing as there is now talk radio to circulate ideas. So this is a positive thing. Certainly, this the pushback that the left is being given. People will, it seems, in modern society, will go with things to a certain point as regards the left's program, but there seem to be points beyond which they will not go, and they make themselves known about that.
So this is another, thank you for that, Father. This is another aspect of good news that we can report to you on behind the headlines. The fact that there will be headlines that actually do tell you the truth, which in the old days, when all of the media were pretty buttoned up, you would never have been able to discover. Never.
That's correct. And if you want to see establishment news, watch the PBS NewsHour sometime. And at generally on Fridays, they may have it other days of the week, they have these two characters, Brooks and Shields.
Oh, yes.
And Shields is supposed to be a little more liberal, and Brooks is supposed to be a little more conservative. But I mean, it's, put them in a bag, shake them up, and they all come out the same, as they used to say on Dragnet. So the recently I was watching one of these programs, and David Brooks, supposedly conservative, absolutely hates Trump. He can't say enough against Trump. He was lamenting to this other guy that, when he gets out, he goes on to the road in probably what they would call flyover country in the Middle West, etc. And he actually deals with people. He says that there is a that the average guy is totally repelled by the Washington politicians, and even people who are Democrats are revolted by this whole circus of the impeachment. And in effect, he admitted they see it as simply political theater.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And he was wringing his hands over this, how absolutely terrible it was that they just didn't really understand the true party line. Really, they didn't know how to put this into a proper context.
Well, it would be enough to make them question democracy. What do you think?
Yeah, how about that, right?
Yes. What are we going to export, though, if we don't export democracy throughout the whole world? That's the deal. So that's the situation in America. Very interesting, colorful, and entertaining situation in the United Kingdom as well, with Boris Johnson calling the surprise general election, winning the general election in December, and now having formed a new government, and once again issuing the promise that the Brexit, the exit from the not the common market, but from the United Europe plan, would indeed take place in January, right?
Yes,
Father?
by saying common market, I think you've sort of dated yourself a little, Your Excellency.
That slipped out.
Yes.
But Father, in some countries, when you're old, that entitles you to veneration.
I've heard that.
In some
We're
countries.
still waiting for
We're
that.
still waiting. Yes, I'm waiting for that. Yes, indeed. Speaking of the election, there are two quotes that struck me so much that I had to write them down to share them with our audience at home. And this is quite along the idea of a pushback, a popular pushback against the leftists and the liberals and the insiders and everybody else. This quote would, I think, apply both to the election which swept Trump into office and also which confirmed Boris Johnson in office in England. When it came to these elections, one commentator wrote, the people knew that they had to give a signal, they had to give a sign, even if those who would benefit from that sign were not themselves perfect. And so, two good examples of politicians who benefit from this pushback against this concerted left-wing movement and conspiracy movement are certainly Trump and Johnson. But the winning quote about Johnson's election is that somebody said, I voted for him because he makes me laugh. Which, if you think about it, would be better than this Jeremy Corbyn. If you voted for him, he would have made you cry.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something. And what is the deal, Father, with the orange hair, too? Both of these politicians have these incredible hairdos. Is that part of the entertainment as well, do you think?
Or part of the laugh.
Part of the laugh. So you get Johnson with his fright wig, and Lord only knows what Trump is going on top of his head.
Oh, in fact, he's gotten to the point where he even jokes about orange being his favorite color.
Does it? Yes.
Well,
once again, it's a laugh.
It's a laugh. But to return to motives, or what people in Britain said about voting for Johnson or why they voted for Johnson, the comment that you heard was that people who'd been voting for the Labour Party for ages said we sort of lent him our vote. That Corbyn was Jeremy Corbyn was the head of the Labour Party, that he was seen as such a repellent character and as an untrustworthy character, and as someone who really had crazy lefty ideas that were too much even for the left in England, that there was a reaction against him. And the idea was that, Boris is got to be better if Corbyn is the best supposedly on our side that the system can produce.
Mm-hmm.
And Boris Johnson, in fact, admitted as much by saying that he realized that there are many people who, in effect, lent their votes to the Conservative Party.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt an obligation now to try to, live up to whatever their expectations were. So, but it seemed to be pretty much the universal sentence now that those who voted for him did, in fact, want to get out of the EU.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's the term, isn't it?
Yeah, EU. Yes,
EU. That's it. It's not common market.
That's right.
Of course. Where have I been all these years?
And this is it's the U.S. Constitution. It's not the Articles of Confederation.
Oh, how about that? Okay, that'd be for another day, but that's interesting.
Yeah. So that particular fact, want to separate from the EU, it's a poke in the eye against globalism.
Mm-hmm.
And
it is.
The idea that we're surrendering our control to someone else. And if a nation as powerful in a certain sense as Britain can do that, that gives hope to other nations as well.
It does, but there's this tension, isn't there, between the reality of who Johnson is. Look at his family. Look at total insiders and very powerful insiders. His education,
Mm-hmm.
and moving among the elite of the elite, and the whole style, which is that of pandering to people and distracting them, and entertaining them. In effect,
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what he's really going to be doing? But then, a bit like Trump, Trump now as we're getting towards the election, has ramped up some of his old themes. And then they're even the old Paul VI type things. If only the Pope knew, if only the president knew,
Yeah.
because they're being disloyal to the president, don't you know, by sending in those extra troops to Afghanistan, because the president really, he wants to remove the troops from. But it's a question, are we talking president? Are we talking prime minister, as in the prime minister of Israel?
Yeah.
There's sometimes a little bit of confusion
Sure.
about who's actually going to be calling the shots here. So it is interesting to watch that tension between, and you see it on both sides of the pond. You see it with Trump and you see it with Johnson.
Surely. Yeah.
There's a populist which got them in despite everything, which is good news. And then there's the reality of who they are, of their everything, and who's pulling the strings behind the headlines. Well, Father, can we end on a positive note? Not that this
I
is
thought
nothing.
this was all positive.
As a matter of fact, you're quite right.
All right.
Now that you mention it, yes, it's been quite positive. But I thought we should give a passing nod towards Time Magazine's Man of the Year, which is Greta the Grumpy, or Greta the Good.
Oh, she's the Man of the Year.
Yeah, she was. Well, now
all
it's
right,
person
okay.
now. See, I'm
All right,
sorry.
person,
I'm
yeah.
dating myself once again. Age.
Mhm.
Now it's known as. In fact, people don't even know what Time Magazine is. But at one time, Time Magazine was quite the thing.
It was a big deal.
It was everybody read Time Magazine, and as with the British papers years ago, it contained very good writing.
Yes.
I remember you commenting on that when you were young.
It had that reputation, and its writers used regularly classical allusions.
Yes.
In their writing. It was a very clear writing style, and it only started, like everything else, to go down the tubes in the 1970s.
Yes.
And to allow its standards to slip.
Right. So Greta is the person of the year, and I read one opinion piece someplace or another on the internet making the case that Greta may indeed save us all, or at least point in the direction of a universal salvation, but not the way that she considers. The author makes the point that if you pay attention to what they call the warmers, the activists convinced that our mere existence on this particular planet could cause it to just blow up, to incinerate at any moment. There are two things that these warmers, aside from the spittle, because when they get to talk to you too close to you to talk, and they start spitting in your face, because they get so excited about these
foam
things.
Foam at the mouth.
Foam at the mouth. Thank you, Father. They're always going to be giving you fantastic prophecies, but these fantastic prophecies, like the different apocalyptic sects in the 19th century America for the end of the world, are, guess what, always false. And every now and again, these same warmers are going to accidentally tell you the truth. That's the same thing as the headlines, as we've seen today in this particular presentation. It's the same thing even with politicians, I think. I don't think you'll find it with the Novus Ordo clergy, but they will tell you the truth sometimes. So they admit that the origins of what they used to call the Green Movement, or the Green New Deal, how at the very beginning, and even Blessed Greta will admit it, it was not originally a climate thing at all. It was, how do you change the whole economy thing? That's what was really going on. And so the princess of melting glaciers, Greta Thunberg, is quoted as saying, after all, the climate crisis is not just about the environment. It's a crisis of human rights, of justice, of political will, colonial, racist, and patriarchal systems of oppression have created and fueled it. We need to dismantle them all. Our political leaders can no longer shirk their responsibilities.
Gee, I like that kind of talk.
Good. Put it right out there. Well, they use the true believers, the people, to get all excited about their latest doctrines and to go on hunger strikes and chain themselves to trees and things like that. But this cause has never really been about the environment. It's just the latest what? It's just the latest example of this perpetual Marxist effort, Marxist cultural effort. Who's the author, Father? Gramsci?
Oh, Gramsci. Yeah.
Gramsci.
Yeah, Antonio Gramsci.
Antonio Gramsci, we've talked about him before, to usurp power and to control people. And of course, they're doing it for our good, don't you know? This is their religion. This is the religion of all these woke individuals who are having their children have mutilating surgery and all of the rest. They've realized that the uh, attempt to wrest power from free people hasn't worked out as they would like it to have worked out. And so now they want us willingly to cede our individual autonomy and to cede our guns too, just by dint of going on because everybody's going along and you have to go along. And the social media tells you that you must indeed go along. But go along with what? Total Marxist revolution. It's not a green movement, it's the same old red movement. It's sort of Christmas, but it's not Christmas, not at all. It's a very, very sad kind of an anti holiday. The current green is the new red. There's no exaggeration there. And so, what a curious thing is that this 16 or now I suppose 17-year-old girl who was quite the manipulative little exploiter herself, and to find herself in this high position of man of the year and the rest, uh, accidentally tells the truth. So that's one way for people to realize what is going on here, and that's an advantage of studying some of this stuff on the internet or your different news sources to discover the truth. And then, of course, the first thing that they will also give you is the seeds for their own destruction, because they will talk about all of the different prophecies. They don't go back, though, to consider the prophecies. The French foreign minister in the era of John Kerry, Laurent Fabius, said, and this was 2,000 days ago, said, we have 500 days left to avoid climate chaos. Well, I guess not. And somebody said, NASA's director said that in 2009 that Obama had only 4 years to save the Earth. These are laugh lines. They're just hilarious. In 2002, the left-wing British paper, The Guardian, said that within a decade, that would have been 2012, global warming would leave the world with a choice between feeding people or feeding animals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all false, and you just do a little research, and you can see how false it is, but then do a little bit more research and put it into context, and you can see it's all part of the Marxist control of thought, of culture, of history, of everything. And thus we conclude our year-end program of analysis. I trust on a hopeful note. Certainly, we are seeing, despite everything, the incredible mercies of the divine providence in our regard. And it is, as the psalmist says, the mercies of the Lord that we are not yet consumed. Meanwhile, someone I'm sure would want to know what's going on at St. Gertrude the Great, Father. What do you think?
I think so.
What's going on at St. Gertrude
What is
the Great?
going on? Well, we had a very wonderful and successful Christmas.
We did.
Beautifully decorated church inside and outside. The choir did an excellent job. Some excellent preaching. Priest guest here, Father Caleb Sons, who is working in Phoenix, Arizona, a graduate of Most Holy Trinity Seminary, is helping us out here. We had a good celebration on Christmas, a little bit of a day of rest afterwards. Unfortunately, I myself have been under the weather with a flu for at least 2 weeks, and I'm still not out of the tunnel yet. I'm hoping tomorrow may be the last day with it. We are on our way to celebrate this weekend the Sunday Mass, the Feast of the Holy Name, and that is in turn followed by the Feast of the Epiphany on Monday, which is always a big parish feast. We have Pontifical or Solemn High Mass, and then we have a little feed afterwards in the church hall. We are the church of parties.
You might want to consider that when you consider your relocation options, dear listening audience at home. Furthermore, the purpose of the dinner, we call it an appreciation dinner, because, as I like to say, one of the reason why St. Gertrude is the great is because we have so many people who are so devoted in all different fields and who help us out, most of them on a volunteer basis, whether it be the beautiful singing or whether it be the office work behind the scenes, the well-trained and disciplined servers that you can see on the webcast masses, and many, many others assist us in all different ways. And we'd like once a year to have, on the feast day of the kings coming with the gifts, to acknowledge their gifts to our Lord and the reality that they go to make our church indeed be great. So we're looking forward to the celebration of the Feast of Epiphany. Thank you, and God bless you, and God willing, at the end of January, we'll be getting together again to see what on earth is going on behind those headlines.
God bless you all.